Hey nitwits, Willie here, and if you know me, then you know that there's one thing that I love above all others, and that's the CBS sitcom Young Sheldon. I quote it constantly, I have a tattoo of Meemaw on my inner thigh, and this past summer I even attended Young Sheldon Con. Granted, I later found out that it was not an officially sanctioned con, and it took place in some lady named Sheila's basement, but we had a good time nonetheless. After a long, hard day at work, there's nothing that calms me down better than flipping on some YS and letting my troubles melt away. So you can imagine my horror the other night when I turned on Netflix, only to find that Young Sheldon wasn't there. I felt hurt, betrayed, angry. I think it goes without saying that I cried. And did I briefly contemplate breaking into Netflix corporate and spray painting Bazinga on the wall? Of course I did, but fortunately it didn't have to come to that thanks to today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. With Atlas VPN, all I had to do was change my location to the UK where they do have Young Sheldon on Netflix, and I was chilling with Sheldon, Georgie, and the rest of the gang in no time. And letting me watch Young Sheldon whenever I want isn't the only perk of Atlas VPN. It also helps to keep my Google searches private, protects me against malware, and even helps me save some coin while I'm online shopping. If you follow my link in the description below, you can get Atlas VPN for only $1.83 a month, and then on top of that, you'll also get an additional 3 months for free. So that's basically nothing. I spent more than 10 times that on Zoe Perry autographs last year. Zoe Perry plays the mom on Young Sheldon. So thank you very much to Atlas VPN for sponsoring this episode, and now let's get on to talking about whatever the hell it is I'm talking about today. Hello nitwits and welcome to Knitting Time with Willie. I'm your host, What's His Name, joined as always by my co-host, Nicholas. And as many of you watching this already know, I am currently on a quest to try and find my own bad movie. A while back, I decided that I wanted to start making videos about bad movies because I really think that talking about bad movies is a very fun thing to do. Unfortunately, I am not the only person who thinks that. By the time my adorable ass came around, there was already a lot of bad movie content on the internet being made by a lot of bigger and arguably better creators than myself. At this point, I feel like most of the truly great bad movies have already been covered by all those other people, and because I don't want to just do the same thing that's already been done, and more importantly, because I often lie awake at night stressing out that I might one day be accused of plagiarism, I made it my mission to try and find my own bad movies to talk about instead. And honestly, I'm really happy that that's the choice I made. Discovering weird new corners of the cinematic world has been a lot of fun, and I really do think that I've managed to find some doozies. If you're new here, I'll post a playlist so you can check out what I mean, but I personally recommend the gay porno about the evil bees or the one about the Christmas elves that kill people. But also, don't watch those ones until after you finish this one because, engagement and shit. I really need to stop telling people to leave my videos. Still, for as much as I've enjoyed my way of doing things, it can at times feel like a double-edged sword. The fact that I'm actively looking for things that not a lot of other people have talked about yet means that the topics I choose for this series are inherently not very popular. It doesn't matter how entertainingly crazy the movie I'm talking about is, if viewers have never heard of it, they're not going to want to spend an hour plus of their lives listening to me rant about it unless they're already really invested in me. And let's be honest here, there aren't that many people who are really invested in me. Yet. And full disclosure, for as much as I do love discovering new bad movies, there have been times where I wish I could just say fuck it and make a video about something without stressing out whether it fits into the parameters that I've set out for myself. I get so many comments where people are like, you should make a video about this movie. And at first I always think, yeah, I should make a video about that movie. But then I think about it a little bit longer and think that as much as I want to make a video about that movie, I can't, because I know of a lot of other people who have already made a video about that movie, and so that would go against the rules. Which is weird because I myself made those rules, so what bad thing do I think is gonna happen if I break them? Am I worried that someone is gonna get mad at me and say in 2021 when you started this series, you actually said you were only gonna talk about movies nobody else talked about, so you're clearly a liar? Unsubscribe? Or am I worried that I'll make a video and someone will be like, I've already seen this movie talked about 100 times in other places. Way to oversaturate the market, jerk. Or maybe I'm just worried that I'm going to spend a month of my time working on a video only to release it and have a bunch of people tell me, actually, Joey Cinema already made a video like this and said the same thing that you did, so clearly you're just copying her. That's right, Joey Cinema is a girl. It's short for Josephine. Never assume anything. Truth is, I'm worried about all of those things and then some. Making these videos can sometimes feel like I'm wading through a minefield of reasons why I shouldn't be making these videos. And as is often the case with wading through minefields, it gets kind of stressful after a while. I would be lying if I said that for the sake of my own sanity and for the sake of my view count, I never wanted to just throw caution to the wind and plow forward with whatever video I wanted to without worrying about what people might think of it or what potential pitfalls it might lead to down the way. And so, that's what I'm going to do. Today, I'm going to be discussing a movie that a lot of you watching have wanted me to do for a while now, but that I have actively avoided because many other people on the internet have already talked about it at length. So fuck it. This is B-Movie. If you're currently on the internet, as I assume most of you are, then I don't really need to explain to you what B-Movie is, because you already know. It's a 2007 animated feature from DreamWorks that has been memed to death because of its inherently insane plot. And that plot is basically that Jerry Seinfeld plays a bumblebee who fucks a human woman. And if for some reason what I just said sounds like a joke to you, then just know that, yeah, it probably was. Based on what I read, this whole thing came about because Jerry Seinfeld was having dinner with his neighbor, who he jokingly pitched this movie to. And because the neighbor also happened to be Steven Spielberg, this interaction alone was enough to get this movie made. And I don't really know what the initial joke was, but if I had to guess, I feel like it probably had something to do with the pun title. I feel like Jerry probably just said something like, you should make a movie about a bee, and then you could call it a B-movie. And Spielberg was like, okay, that's a solid title, and we've got Jerry Seinfeld on board. And that alone was enough for him to sink $150 million into the making of this thing. And keep in mind that probably doesn't include the advertising budget. As best as I can tell, despite the fact that this was nothing more than a joke, once Spielberg was on board, Seinfeld kind of just said fuck it and went with it. The sense I get is that at that point, he didn't really have anything to do with his day besides counting the money he was making off of residuals from his sitcom. So he was kind of just like, sure, why not? A big budget animated feature seems like it could be fun. Because truth told, this movie really does feel like it was made by someone who was just trying to have fun with it. And I know that sounds like it would be a good thing, but, well, I'm not entirely sure that it is. And to show you what I mean, I'm gonna break it down more in depthly by taking you through the plot. So, like, pray for me, because this is gonna be a tough one. Alright, I'm gonna say right up front that of all the movies I've ever talked about on here, this one by far has the hardest plot to explain. And like, when I say that, know that I don't mean like what happens in the plot is hard to explain, because that part is fairly easy. There's never a point where I was like, B-movie is so intricate, I can't keep up. No, what I actually mean when I say that the plot is hard to explain is that the mere existence of the plot is hard to explain. Normally when I watch a movie, I can at the very least make sense of how the filmmakers ended up making the choices that they made. Like, even when they miss the mark by a mile, I still usually feel like I have a pretty good idea where they were aiming. That is not the case with B-movie though. I truly have no idea what the people making this film were going for here, and I also don't get the sense that they really did either. Like, my best guess at how to justify the thing I just watched is that Jerry Seinfeld had his idea for a movie about bees, and so they hired a bunch of different writers to write a bunch of different scripts based solely on that prompt. And then, because the prompt was so broad, they ended up with a lot of very different takes on what B-movie could be, and so some overworked intern read through all of them and narrowed the options down to the 3 best and printed them out to give to Jerry Seinfeld to read. Unfortunately, staying up all night reading B-themed script after B-themed script left her feeling tired, so as she was leaving the copy room, she tripped and ended up dropping all 3 scripts on the ground into one big mess of papers. The intern, who for sure was not getting paid enough for that shit, didn't feel like going through page by page and organizing the scripts back into their original form, so she just shuffled them all into one big mess of paper and handed that off to Seinfeld. If she got in trouble, she didn't care, she just cared about getting home and getting some sleep, because staying up all night and reading B-movie spec scripts had taken a lot out of her. Luckily for her, though, nobody actually noticed. Seinfeld took the script and okayed it without ever reading it because he was barely interested in the project to begin with, and he had better things to do, you know? Getting coffee in cars with comedians and whatnot. This is obviously very heavy speculation on my part, especially because according to the official accounts of this film's production, Seinfeld actually played a role in writing the script, but this story I've concocted in my head is literally the only way I can fathom how this film ended up with the script that it has, and so this is the lens I will be viewing it with going forward. And because of that, rather than doing a traditional plot summary, I will instead be doing 3. One for each of the 3 original movie scripts that I believe were brutally murdered, hacked to bits, and then stitched back together in order to form the horrible Frankenstein that is B-movie. Before I can discuss those movies, though, I have to discuss how they're all set up, because I believe that all 3 plots start in the same place before ultimately branching out. And that place is really fucking weird. Like many great movies, it begins with an epigraph.
According to all known laws of aviation, there is no way that a bee should be able to fly. Its wings are too small to get its fat little body off the ground. The bee, of course, flies anyway, because bees don't care what humans think is impossible.
And when I saw that, my heart literally sank into the pit of my stomach. This is the first time that I've ever seen this movie, and I didn't really know much about it outside of what I've seen making fun of it on the internet. So I was not expecting to see it open in this way, because that little myth about the bumblebee is actually very important to me. Granted, the version I heard ended a little bit differently. My version is that according to science, bees should not be able to fly, but nobody ever told the bees that, so they just do it anyway. So yeah, it's not exactly the same, but it's very clearly pulling from the same source, and I will be perfectly honest. I am not very happy about that. A lot of you watching this will probably be surprised to hear this about me, but I actually have a huge problem with overthinking things, and because of that, that fake factoid about bees has become something of a mantra in my life that I use to try and remind myself to not let my own thoughts get in my way. I repeat it to myself often. I came very close to getting a tattoo of a bee because of it, and I have even referenced it on this very show. There's an urban legend that says that scientifically speaking, bees shouldn't be able to fly, but the only reason that they can is because nobody ever told the bees that, so they just do it anyway. To watch as it is used as the opening of Bee Movie? I don't know how else to put it. It feels like a betrayal. And what's worse is that Bee Movie definitely had it first. I don't think I learned about that myth until I was in college, which would have been well after the release of this film, so while I can say with certainty that I didn't get the story from Bee Movie directly, I think odds are pretty good that Bee Movie is what drove it into the zeitgeist enough that it eventually made it onto whatever famous quotes website my pretentious ass pulled it off of in 2010. And I really shouldn't harp on this for too long because I still have so much more of this goddamn movie left to get to, but it is genuinely upsetting thinking about how much my life may have been impacted by Bee Movie without me even knowing it. I'm not gonna lie, I'm very happy that I didn't get that tattoo. After that initial quote, we're introduced to our protagonist, Barry Benson, as he gets ready for his first day of bee work.
Yellow, black, yellow, black, yellow, black, yellow, black, yellow, black, yellow, black. Ooh, black and yellow. Yeah, let's shake it up a little.
And I would say that that moment right there, about a minute in, was the exact moment that this movie lost me. Because, I don't get why this bee is wearing a sweater. As best as I can tell, he's supposed to be a normal bumblebee like the kind that exist in the real world. And not to brag, but I've seen many of those over the course of my life, and I can say with confidence that they do not wear clothing. Don't get me wrong, I wish that they did, because that sounds adorable, but they do not, and so I think that it's weird that this one does. It was so weird, in fact, that I tried really hard to justify the logic at play here to myself, and the best I could come up with was that the movie was saying that the fuzzy stripes covering a bee's body are actually the result of a sweater they're wearing, because that would make sense in a cartoony sort of way. Unfortunately, though, that is clearly not what's happening here, because one, unlike a bee's body, the sweater he wears only has a single stripe across the chest, and two, as we can see in this shot of what is apparently a fully nude Barry Benson, he already has stripes attached to his body. What's more is that even if my fuzzy stripe hypothesis was enough to explain the sweater, it would not explain the shoes, because as we can see a couple of seconds earlier, Barry has an extensive collection of Converses as well. Based on what I have been shown by this movie, I have no choice but to believe that in this world, bees are flying around wearing tiny little clothes. And if that is indeed the case, then it is absolutely insane. And I know what a lot of you are probably saying right now. Willie, it's just a kid's movie. Stop overthinking it. You're a disgrace to your parents. And yes, I'll admit that there have been times in the past when I have overthought some of the movies I've talked about on here, but I honestly don't think that this is one of those times. I believe that a movie can do literally anything that it wants to, so long as it makes sense within said movie's own internal logic. But based on the logic that Bee Movie presents, the fact that the bees are wearing clothes is extremely bizarre. Every last one of this movie's many plots hinge on the fact that the humans in this world very much view bees as bees. They treat them as less than and kill them without remorse, and when one of them starts talking, the whole of humanity is genuinely shocked by it. They think of bees the same way that we in the real world think of them, and That is weird because I really think that if one day in the real world, all the bees stepped out of their hives wearing clothing that they had clearly produced themselves, how we viewed them would be very different. Like, I personally don't enjoy killing bugs, and I like to avoid it whenever possible, but I can do it when I need to, and when I do, I usually don't feel too beaten up about it. That said, though, if I whacked a bee dead and then lifted up the rolled up newspaper I used only to see a hand-knit sweater and a pair of high tops soaking in its blood and entrails, that probably would leave me feeling fairly guilty. And if after I did that, another bee in a black suit came to his fallen friend's mangled corpse to mourn, and that bee told me that I should be ashamed of myself for what I've done, well, I'd probably feel a lot worse. I don't think that I'd be surprised by the fact that the bee was capable of speech, because, I don't know, they already have clothes. That feels like a way more advanced behavior. Especially because it's not like this clothing is crude. Barry Benson isn't wearing a loincloth. He has a closet full of fairly ornate items that have all clearly been mass-produced. The moment a human in this world saw a bee buzzing around dressed to the nines, they should be able to instantly recognize that they are intelligent creatures with an advanced civilization and complex language all their own, and their attitudes towards said bee should adjust accordingly. And I know I'm spending a lot more time on the fact that the bees wear clothes than I probably should, but there's a good reason for that, and that's that the implications of it really muddled everything that happened after Barry picked out that first sweater in a way that genuinely took me out of the movie. It's a really weird choice to me, and I think it speaks to a much larger problem that I have with B-Movie, and that's that the people making it do not seem to have a single clue what world their movie exists in. The first half an hour or so is mostly dedicated to introducing the audience to the bee world that Barry lives in, but the way they go about it is so inconsistent that I truly could not tell you what they were going for here. Like I said, I think that the easiest way to explain this movie is to view it as 3 different scripts that were all hastily crammed together, and if I'm right in saying that, then I think that there might also be multiple different worlds being built up here all at once, and they all conflict in a way that ends up creating a very muddled mess. And again, this is all just a theory, and a lot of what I'm about to talk about may only exist inside my own head, but the way I see it, there are 2 very distinct visions for what life inside of the Hive is supposed to be like at play here. The first, and I would argue more successful of these, is that the Hive is kind of just a normal beehive, only all of the bee stuff has been mapped onto the human world. I think that the clearest example of this sort of world building is the fact that the bees use their antenna as cell phones. In the real world, bees use their antenna to communicate, and humans use cell phones to communicate, so combining them is a fun detail that creates a richer background for the story being told. And I truly think that if they could have found more clear examples of this sort of one-to-one analogy, then mapping the Hive onto the human world would have been the absolute strongest path they could have taken in these early scenes. But unfortunately, not all of the comparisons are quite so clean. I think one of the worst examples of something like this happens when Barry is talking to his best friend Adam. The 2 of them are on their way to their graduation, so they start to reminisce about the path they took to get there.
Hey, Adam.
Hey, Barry. Is that fuzz gel?
A little. It's a special day, finally graduating.
I never thought I'd make it.
Yeah, 3 days of grade school, 3 days of high school.
Those were so awkward.
3 days of college. I'm glad I took off one day in the middle and just hitchhiked around the Hive.
You did come back different.
And clearly the joke there is supposed to be that because bees have shorter lifespans than humans, days of their lives are equivalent to years of ours. And while I think that that comparison makes sense, I think that whatever humor is derived from it is not worth the amount of questions that it raises. It's hard to accurately gauge the timeline of this movie, but I think at a minimum, it has to be at least 2 human weeks long. And so based on what Barry just said, that should be decades for him. And what's worse is that when Barry actually starts talking to the humans, they all talk at the same pace as one another. But if time is really moving that quickly for the bees, that should not be the case. That stupid little one-off joke makes me think that there should be a much artsier cut of this movie where two lovers are doing their best to be with each other even though they operate under completely different timelines, and one of them is aging into dust right in front of the other's eyes, you know, kind of like a romantic version of Interstellar. Only one of them is a talking bee. Actually, I would watch that, so. I feel like if I were to bring this up to the filmmakers, they'd probably just tell me that I'm overthinking it. That was just a one-off joke meant to make you laugh, and the implications of it aren't really meant to carry over into the next scene. And like normally, I'd be fine with that sort of explanation. I love it when things follow the sort of cartoon logic that I think they're going for here. But in order for that cartoon logic to work, it needs to have, well, logic. And I don't think that B-movie has that. Like, in the first part of that clip I showed you, Alan asked Barry if he's wearing fuzz gel.
Is that fuzz gel?
I think that it's another small example of them trying to map bee life onto human life by drawing parallels. They're saying that the bee's fuzz is analogous to human hair. And like, whatever, it's a nothing line, and I probably wouldn't have even noticed it, except for the fact that a couple minutes earlier, we see Barry getting ready, and he very clearly puts honey in his hair. So like, which one is it, movie? Fuzz gel or honey? I don't think that there was any great amount of thought given to the continuity here. I think that B-movie was just meant to be joke after joke after joke after joke. And if this were a stand-up set, I think that would be fine, but because it's being presented to me as a story, my brain is doing its best to try and process it as a story, and because of that, when the movie contradicts itself so much from scene to scene, my brain works overtime trying to make sense of things that simply do not make sense, and as a result, watching this movie can at times feel like what I imagine it feels like to take way too much crystal meth. What makes matters worse is that, like I said, I truly believe that they're trying to build two separate worlds at the same time in the opening parts of this movie, and those two worlds do not really mix well. Aside from trying to make life in the Hive feel analogous to life in the human world, B-movie also seems to be trying to make the Hive feel like a sci-fi alternate society that is entirely its own thing, which, yeah, those are two very different approaches. These two conflicting worldviews constantly clash with one another in a way that's so confusing that I don't even know if I can properly explain in words the kind of confusing that it is. It's going for so many different things at the same time that you never really know what specific thing it's going for moment to moment, and that makes finding your footing in B-movie extremely difficult. I think that one of the best examples of what I'm talking about here might be the bee's stinger, because I have so many questions about the way the movie portrays the bee's stinger that I genuinely considered making an entire video about just that. The first time we're made aware of the stinger is when Barry sharpens his at the end of his morning routine.
Looking sharp.
And like, even in a vacuum, that moment is weird because I feel like that would probably hurt like hell for Barry. He is literally jamming a part of his body into a pencil sharpener. In the context of the movie, though, it's even weirder because we have just seen Barry get ready in a way that feels fairly human. He uses honey as hair gel and mouthwash, and so you're kind of like, okay, so in this world, honey is like their hair gel and their mouthwash. And because of that, by the time you get to the part where Barry sharpens his stinger, your brain is kind of primed to be like, okay, so what part of a human's morning routine is that supposed to be? And that's when things start to feel very confusing because I don't think that it's supposed to be anything. And things only get harder to comprehend from there because unsurprisingly, this movie makes a lot of stinger jokes and every last one of them begs new questions. The next time we hear about them is this interaction between Barry and Alan on their way to graduation.
Hey, did you hear about Frankie?
Yeah.
You going to his funeral?
No, I'm not going to his funeral. Everybody knows you sting someone, you die. You don't waste it on a squirrel. He was such a hothead.
Yeah, I guess he could have just gotten out of the way.
Okay, so based on that clip, How many of you think that Barry is eventually going to sting someone defending something important to him and die as a result? Comment below and I'll let you know a little later on. The answer may surprise you. That's besides the point though. This movie is very difficult to talk about without going on tangents. Right now, we're talking about the stingers, and that clip I just played clearly shows that bees very much consider them to be weapons, which is yet another wrinkle in my understanding of them. Watching that conversation, it's hard not to flash back to Barry sharpening his and think like, okay, so if stingers are supposed to be weapons, then sharpening yours would be equivalent to what? Like polishing a gun? Then you start to think like, okay, so does that mean that Barry polishes his gun every day as a part of his morning routine? Is Barry Benson a gun nut? And things only get worse later on when the movie draws comparisons between the stinger and the human dick, because of course it does.
I'm gonna go drain the old stinger.
So then you flash back to Barry's morning routine again and think, okay, so what does that make sharpening your stinger then? Jerking off? Trimming your pubes? I don't know, but I feel like we probably shouldn't be seeing it. And then you think back again and remember that the stingers are also weapons, so you start to think, wait, so are the bees just flying around attacking people with their dicks? Because that's fucked up. I feel like that probably shouldn't be in a kid's movie. Watching B-movie can sometimes leave you with the feeling of being a little untethered because they never commit to one singular point of view, and so you never really have anything stable to ground you in this world. And of course, it doesn't help matters that, like I said, I truly do think that there are 3 stories being told here, so that really mucks everything up even further. And as I say that out loud, I realize that I am currently like 20 minutes into the plot summary section of this video, and I have not begun to discuss a single one of said plots yet, so I should probably get on with it. So just know that this is the confusing setup we're dealing with as I begin to break down what I think is the first movie buried within B-movie. So I briefly mentioned the fact that there seem to be a lot of sci-fi elements in B-movie, and I kind of think that's because one of the original drafts of this film was a dystopian coming-of-age story. I have never personally seen Divergent, but there are a lot of aspects of B-movie that are very similar to what I imagine Divergent to be like in my head. As I said earlier, when we first meet Barry Benson, he's a bright-eyed young bumblebee on his way to graduation, pleased as punch to enter the workforce. He and his friend Alan drive to the ceremony because the bees in this movie have cars for some reason, and as they go, we're introduced to a hive that is very much centered around the production of honey. At one point on their commute, in what is to me the strangest moment in a movie that is comprised of nothing but strange moments, the bees encounter a loop-de-loop in the road. And watching that, I damn near threw my phone at the TV because it was already weird to me that the bees were driving tiny little convertibles, so the fact that they were driving those tiny little convertibles on roads shaped like roller coasters felt like weird on weird on weird in a way that I did not care for. The moment took me so out of the movie that I didn't even realize that they actually explained the reason behind the loop-de-loop, and the explanation that they give is surprisingly dark.
I love this, incorporating the amusement park right into our regular day.
I guess that's why they say we don't need vacations.
And that right there is the hive that we're dealing with. It's a place so relentlessly dedicated to labor that even the bees' leisure time is incorporated into their daily commute. And at first, Barry seems to be on board with it. This is the only world he knows, and he seems content to kind of just go with the flow and accept the fate he's been promised since childhood. It's only when he's confronted with the reality of what that all means that he actually starts to question the world around him. After his graduation, he's immediately whisked away to this weird little tour of the hive's honey factory, where he's introduced to all the different jobs that a bee in this world can have. And this is where a lot of the movie's really sci-fi elements come in, because there's all sorts of high-tech machinery used to aid in the production of honey that the animators really went ham on. I think that we're supposed to think that it's all whimsical and Dr. Seussian, but for me as a person who is old enough to rent a car, it's all just kind of stupid, and it seems very inefficient for a society that's supposed to be all about efficiency. This one contraption in particular really pissed me off.
And here we have our latest advancement, the Krellman.
Wow, what does that do?
Catches that little strand of honey that hangs after you pour it. Saves us millions.
And I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like I know more about honey than bees do, but I will say that it is very sticky, and a cursory glance at that machine is all I need to tell you that it is not going to be very effective at harvesting it from a jar. Also, I have no idea why they needed to have bees be the ones wearing those fingers on their heads. I feel like the fingers would be just as effective were you to put them at the end of a stick, and including workers in the process just kind of feels like, I don't know, like torture? Just a little bit. Barry clearly doesn't feel the same way about the factory as I do, though, because he is in awe of everything that he sees. I kinda get the sense that the movie is saying that he's so impressed with the world around him that he wants to try out a little bit of everything that it has to offer, and because of that, he's horrified when the bee tour guide says this.
Most bee jobs are small ones, but bees know that every small job, if it's done well, means a lot. But choose carefully, because you'll stay in the job that you pick for the rest of your life.
The same job for the rest of your life? I didn't know that.
What's the difference?
Huh?
Although then again, maybe I'm wrong about him wanting to do everything, because it also kind of seems like Barry just doesn't want to work, period, because, well, bee working conditions are clearly in need of some reform.
And you'll be happy to know that bees as a species haven't had one day off in 27 million years. Whew.
So you'll just work us to death?
We'll sure try.
Whatever the case may be, when Barry hears that he'll be forced to do the same job every second of every day until he dies, he takes it poorly, and he starts to rethink the rules of the society he lives in, but not before there's just another random roller coaster for no reason, because fuck this movie. Barry leaves the tour angry about what he learned on it, and questioning for the first time in his life if the perfect world he's been raised in is really as perfect as it seems.
What's the difference? Adam, how could you say that? One job forever? That's an insane choice to have to make.
Well, I'm relieved. Now we only have to make one decision in life.
But Adam, how could they never have told us that?
Barry, why would you question anything? We're bees. We're the most perfectly functioning society on Earth.
Hey!
And it took me a couple of viewings to catch this, because this movie is very hard to pay close attention to, but if you look in the background there, that is very clearly a mass shooting joke that B-Movie is making. The movie is saying that the amount of work that the bees are subjected to caused one of them to go on a stinging spree, which is both an extremely odd choice and also evidence in support of the whole stingers or guns theory that I floated a while back. Also, clearly not the most pressing issue I have with this joke about gun violence in the background of this children's movie, but earlier on they very pointedly established that every bee can only sting one person before they die, so I don't know how one of them could have stung 7. Yet another example of B-Movie refusing to follow even the most blatant of its own rules. While Barry is in the midst of his existential crisis, he sees what are called pollen jocks, who are the bees that go out and gather up the pollen for the honey, and because he is now realizing that he's doomed to a life of repetitive, monotonous work, the idea of leaving the hive is starting to sound pretty damn good to him. As they watch the jocks return after a day out in the fields, Barry and Alan are coated in what seems to be some pollen that they collected, and Barry uses it as an opportunity to try and impress what appear to be some nearby pollen jock groupies.
Look at that. That's more pollen than you and I will ever see in a lifetime.
It's just a status symbol. I think bees make too big a deal out of it.
Perhaps. Unless you're wearing it and the ladies see you wearing it.
Those ladies? Oh, aren't they our cousins too?
Distant.
Oh yeah, the groupies also happen to be his cousins, which is one of the more regrettable aspects of the movie. We actually learn about this a few scenes earlier, but all of the bees in the hive are related, so everyone in Barry's potential dating pool is his cousin, and I don't know, maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but that does feel like a very strange detail to include here. I think it's obviously meant to be a joke designed to call attention to the fact that in real life, all the bees in a given hive would actually be related, but just because it's the case in real life, that doesn't mean that it has to be the case in this children's movie. After all, if this were real life, Barry would be female, and also he wouldn't talk or drive cars or wear a sweater, so clearly they're willing to play around with the reality of life as a bee in order to suit the story they're trying to tell here, and because of that, the fact that they insisted on making all of the bees in the hive related by blood is an odd choice, and it means that the bulk of what happens next in the film is predicated on some very light incest. But yeah, Barry pretends to be a pollen jock in an effort to try and fuck his own cousins, and as he's doing that, an actual pollen jock hears him and decides to have some fun with him by calling his bluff. He invites Barry on one of their flights, and because of his ongoing existential crisis, Barry accepts the offer. And then he just goes on a flight. Which is weird in a lot of ways. Most of the early parts of this movie are based on the fact that bees live in this strict society where they have to constantly work the same job until they die. So the fact that he just kind of fucks off for the day and does another job undercuts all of that just a little bit. Especially because it's not like he's lying or exploiting a loophole or anything like that. Everything Barry does here seems to be totally sanctioned by bee society. There are even forms for him to sign.
Sign here. Just initial that. Thank you.
But whatever, they clearly just needed a way to get Barry out of the hive, and so that's what happens, and it plays out exactly like you'd expect. Barry has a blast exploring all the wonders of the new world he finds himself in before ultimately encountering danger and realizing that the safety of his hive isn't all that bad. What you might not expect, though, is that the danger he encounters comes in the form of a tennis ball, which is a plot point that I have a couple of issues with. First and foremost, the reason the tennis ball poses such a threat to Barry is because he and the rest of the bees mistake it for a flower, which is stupid and points to a much larger issue I have with this movie, which is that the bees often seem baffled by basic human inventions, even though they probably shouldn't be. I'm pretty sure that my puppy is capable of distinguishing between a tennis ball and a flower, and he does not have the mental capacity it takes to learn how to operate a motor vehicle, so I feel like the bees should have no problem with it at all. Also, the reason the tennis ball poses such a threat to Barry's life isn't because it's a gigantic projectile hurling through the air at many miles per hour, because that would actually make sense. Rather, in his efforts to extract pollen from the ball, Barry becomes inextricably stuck to it and is forced to ride it back and forth while the humans play their game, and I guess I can't say this with 100% certainty, but I'm pretty sure that bees don't work that way. A more dedicated YouTuber than myself would get a bee and a tennis ball and actually test it out by putting the bee on the tennis ball and seeing what happens. And while I'm for sure not going to do anything like that, I feel fairly confident that if I did, the bee would be able to fly off without much trouble. And even if it did get stuck on there, I feel like if I were to then whack the ball really hard with a tennis racket, that would be enough to jostle it loose. That doesn't happen in B-movie world though, so Barry is volleyed back and forth before a character voiced by Putty from Seinfeld slices the ball over the fence, sending Barry on a hellish journey through Manhattan. And I won't go into everything that happens because it's not important, but just know that Barry should be dead. Eventually, Barry lands on the flower bed outside of a Manhattan apartment, which, in a weird coincidence, also happens to belong to the guy voiced by Putty who was just playing tennis a few minutes ago. He goes inside, and when he does, B-Movie throws pretty much everything we've just seen out the window and becomes an entirely different film. I think that of all of B-movies' plots, the love story is probably the one that most people think about when they think about this movie, because, well, it's a love story between a human and a talking bee. It's kind of hard to forget. That said, it's also probably the one I'm going to spend the least amount of time talking about, because, well, it honestly doesn't really feel that important in the grand scheme of B-movie. You could cut literally anything out of this movie and it would still make the same amount of sense that it currently does, but I think that of all the things that could easily be removed, the love story would probably be the easiest of all because not a lot happens in it. Honestly, I might not have even included it as one of the plots were it not for the fact that once the love interest is introduced, it's the only thing that the movie focuses on. Just about everything that we were taught to care about in the previous act of the movie is set to the side in a manner that's so brazen that it's almost admirable. Like, they make this huge deal about how hard it is to leave the Hive and how dangerous the outside world is, so you'd think that getting back there would be its own little journey full of all sorts of pitfalls, but that is not the case. Barry seems to get back home without any issue at all, and when it comes time for the movie to tell us how that happened, this is the explanation we get.
How'd you get back?
Poodle.
And not gonna lie, that's a solid joke. I did laugh very hard at that one. Still, funny or not, that was also the exact moment I realized, oh, nobody involved in this thing gave a single fuck. Even when the movie tells you that something matters, if in the moment B-movie doesn't feel like dealing with it, it will instantly push it to the side in favor of a quick joke. Remember how Barry spent the entire first act stressed out that he had to pick one job that he'll do for the rest of his life? Well, now he's just allowed to do nothing all day for as long as he wants until he makes the right decision. Remember how going out of the Hive was this impossible feat that Barry could never do alone? Well, now he can easily go out on his own whenever he wants, anytime he wants a nooner with his human lady love. The entirety of what we saw up to this point gets completely buried so that the movie can spend all of its time focusing on the love story, and that's honestly kind of a shame because the love story part of this movie is not interesting. Like I said, it begins when Barry enters an apartment belonging to his future ladylove and Putty from Seinfeld, and when the people inside see him, they react as most humans in this movie react when they see a bumblebee, with unbridled terror. They scream and recoil in fear, and just as Putty is about to murder our protagonist in cold blood, the love interest, whose name I do not remember, steps in and saves Barry's life.
Wait! Don't kill him!
You know I'm allergic to them. This thing could kill me.
Well, why does his life have any less value than yours?
And that's a nice moment with a sweet message designed to either teach kids to respect animals or condition them to be anti-abortion when they grow up. I can't really tell. That said, though, I do have a few issues with it, and the first and most important of them is the dude's allergic, lady. I know I just spent a long time arguing that humans in this world shouldn't kill bees without remorse, but clearly they do, and if anyone has a right to, it's this dude, because it's either them or him. Bee allergies are no joke. And because bee allergies are no joke, I do think that the line about how Barry's life has the same amount of value as Putty's, while nice in a broad sense, is kind of fucked up in this specific context. They gloss over this a little bit because it kind of conflicts with the movie's central love story, but Barry's love interest and Putty are goddamn married. And maybe I'm just needy, but I do hope to God that whoever I marry thinks that my life has more value than that of a bee, especially in a world where I have a bee allergy, and by valuing the bee's life, my spouse is putting my own life at genuine risk. Also, not for nothing, but it's weird to me that the movie would have this human care so much about the life of a random insect because the insects do not seem to share the same perspective. Up until this point in the movie, the bees have demonstrated a shockingly callous attitude towards the death of their bee brethren. Betherin. Aside from Barry's apathetic reaction to his friend's death from earlier, and the casual mass shooting joke that was buried in the background, we also see this moment when the guy who hands out jobs describes workplace bee death in a manner that can only be described as giddy.
Whenever a bee dies, that's an opening. See that? He's dead, dead, another dead one, deady, deadified, 2 more dead, dead from the neck up, dead from the neck down. But that's life.
And if you think that's bad, then just wait until you see how Barry reacts when he actually sees a dead bug on his journey through Manhattan.
Ew, gross.
And like, whatever, I don't really care, fuck this movie. But it does seem weird that they would try and make the idea that all life is equal such a central message in this part, when that sentiment is not really echoed anywhere else. Whatever though, Barry seems to be genuinely touched by her act of kindness, so after she saves him, he decides that he needs to thank her. Unfortunately for him though, thanking her would mean breaking bee law or some shit, because while the bees can talk to humans, they are not supposed to. Torn between his desire to uphold the generations-long status quo between humans and bees and his desire to show his gratitude, Barry kind of just follows the lady around her apartment, thinking out loud over what he should do. And this was another part of the movie where I was a little bit confused by what was going on, because this whole scene is about Barry trying to decide if he should talk in front of a human, but the whole time he's deciding, he's also talking in front of a human.
I could really get in trouble. It's a bee law. You're not supposed to talk to a human. Can't believe I'm doing this. I've got to. Oh, I can't do it. Come on. No. Yes. No. Do it. I can't. How should I start it? You like jazz?
I'm not crazy, right? The lady should absolutely hear him. Like, he's not even whispering. Whatever though, Barry thanks her for saving his life, and the two of them enter into a very complicated romance. And I feel like a lot of you probably want me to talk a lot about how weird it is that this movie features a full-size human woman dating a talking bee, because that's what you're supposed to do when you talk about bee movie, but honestly, I don't really have that much to say. Like, don't get me wrong, it's definitely weird, but that said, there is a lot of weird shit in this movie, and when you put all that weird shit side by side, I don't think that the human-bee commingling even manages to crack the top 10. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I condone bestiality, but that said, if we lived in a world where animals were capable of giving informed consent, as Barry clearly is, then I think that my attitude towards it would be more like, who am I to judge, rather than abject horror. Especially because, as the movie has already established in no uncertain terms, all of Barry's potential apian mates are also his blood relatives, so that's not great. So yeah, while it's weird that he's dating a human, when his options are either Renee Zellweger or incest, I think that Barry is making the right call. Which is not to say that I don't think this relationship is fucked up, it's just that the reason it's fucked up has less to do with the woman's species and more to do with her relationship status. Like I said, she is very married when she meets Barry, and that does not seem to change until long after she and Barry begin their tryst. And while we never see the two of them have any sort of physical affair because DreamWorks is a bunch of cowards, Barry and his lady love are having a pretty blatant emotional affair right in front of the poor husband's eyes.
Here's to a great team.
To a great team.
Well, hello.
Oh, Ken.
Hello.
I didn't think you were coming.
No, I was just late. I tried to call, but the battery.
I didn't want all this to go to waste, so I called Barry. Luckily, he was free.
Yeah.
Oh, that was lucky.
Add on top of that, the fact that the affair that his wife is having is with a bumblebee, and until a few days ago, he didn't even know that bees were capable of human speech, and it makes perfect sense to me that the whole situation eventually causes the guy to snap and chase Barry around his apartment with a makeshift flamethrower. If we're being honest, I would probably do the same thing. But yeah, like I said, this part of the movie is kind of dull. It's basically just watching them go on a couple of dates. And it just so happens that one of those dates takes place in a supermarket because, sure, why not? And it's there that Barry sees the honey aisle for the first time. And when he does, the movie again shifts gears into an entirely different plot. Upon learning that humans have large supplies of honey that they've taken from bees, Barry starts to freak the fuck out.
Why is this here?
For people. We eat it.
Why? You don't have enough food of your own?
Well, yes.
How do you even get it?
Well, bees make it.
I know who makes it, and it's hard to make it. There's heating and cooling and stirring. You need a whole Krellman thing.
Barry's main issue here is that bees have worked very hard to make that honey, so the fact that humans would take it and profit off of it is really unfair. And while I actually do think that that's an interesting setup for a story, it feels very weird to me that Barry would be the protagonist of it. As best as I can tell, Barry has not yet worked a day in his life. His knowledge of the honey-making process begins and ends with that factory tour we saw earlier, and instead of choosing a job, he has instead spent the last couple of days of his life, which, lest you forget, are actually years of his life, leaving the hive and hanging out with a human. And don't get me wrong, I do get why Barry is mad here, because from his point of view, the humans taking honey from the bees is absolutely fucked up. But that said, making him the center of the bees versus human storyline feels like an odd choice to me, because of all the bees we've seen in the movie, he by far has the least amount of stakes in the conflict. Still, he is the star of the film, and this is what the film is about now, apparently. So Barry makes it his mission to find out how the humans are getting their honey. He sneaks into the grocery store warehouse and sword fights a stock boy into submission with his stinger dick. And under threat of being stung, the stock boy tells Barry that they get their honey from a farm. And so Barry follows a truck out of the city to see what's up, and what he finds there is absolutely horrifying. Well, actually, it's just a bee farm, but from Barry's perspective, it's absolutely horrifying. Greedy human farmers keep bees captive against their will and drug them with smoke for the sole purpose of taking advantage of their labor and stealing honey from them. Well, maybe not the sole purpose. The way the film portrays them, it also kind of seems like they get off on animal cruelty a little bit. Presumably so they can go bang while they're still hard from all of that bee torturing they just did. And while they do that, Barry goes to investigate the situation and finds that it's much bigger than he realized, with hundreds of different captive colonies being robbed. Moment would have probably hit a lot harder had the movie not spent so much time showing us just how terrible working conditions in the hive are, because I don't know, at least the smoked up bees get to rest for a second. I doubt any of them are going to go on a stinging spree anytime soon. Still, for as not terrible as the bee farm seem in the context of the movie, I do feel like they're hinting at something a lot darker. I don't fully know what the filmmakers were going for with this subplot exactly, but for me personally, it was hard not to take it as an analogy for slavery. You have a bunch of people held captive against their will and forced to work on a farm while their captors profit on their labors. I guess maybe a less problematic reading, depending on who you ask, could be that it's actually an analogy for capitalism versus socialism. The hive kind of represents an idealized version of socialism where everyone works hard and splits the fruits of their labors equally, while the farm represents capitalism where everyone at the bottom works hard and the guys at the top exploit that labor and take all the profits for themselves. I also think if you really wanted to, you could probably find some parallels between this section and the Holocaust. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but I do think it's probably there. Or maybe I'm just reading too much into it and it's just a bee farm in a kid's movie. But whatever the case may be, for me personally, my mind went straight to slavery. And I will be perfectly honest. That is not a place I was expecting my mind to go during my viewing of Bee Movie. And if I'm right in saying that this movie is an analogy for slavery, then I guess that would make Barry an abolitionist, because after he sees the farm, he easily travels from upstate New York back to the Hive and goes on a mission to stop bee exploitation once and for all. Part of his campaign involves spreading awareness, which he does by going on the bee equivalent of Larry King Live.
Tonight we're talking to Barry Benson. Did you ever think, I'm just a kid from the Hive, I can't do this?
Larry, bees have never been afraid to change the world. I mean, what about Bee Columbus? Bee Gandhi? Bejesus?
Really, movie? You're gonna go with B. Larry King? When Larry Sting was right there? I mean, shit, even Larry Queen would have been an improvement. Also, what the fuck, Barry? When you talk about all the great bees who changed the world for good, you're really gonna open with Bee Columbus? Bee Columbus was a monster who committed all sorts of bee genocide. Please educate yourself on bee history. Barry's media blitz is only phase 1 of his crusade for bee rights. His main plan is to actually sue all of humanity for taking bees' honey. Yeah. From there, the movie becomes an ongoing legal battle, wherein Barry serves as a lawyer who is trying his best to free all bees from human bondage. And you know, does this plot suggest that Bee Movie exists in a terrifying alternate universe where the New York State Judiciary has jurisdiction over the entire rest of humanity? It sure does, but beyond that, I actually think that this is probably the strongest part of the movie. The episodic structure of the court case is a lot more conducive to this movie's sense of humor because it allows for joke after joke after joke after joke without making you feel like your hair is being pulled out of your scalp from the inside of your brain. It also introduces us to Barry's opposing counsel, who is without question my favorite character in the film. He's southern and really over the top, and he's also voiced by John Goodman, which is always fun. His major tactic is to try and provoke Barry into getting so mad that he stings someone in front of the jury. And the way he goes about this is basically by listing off a bunch of questions that I think that a lot of people watching the movie have also been wondering.
Mr. Benson D., I'll ask you what I think we'd all like to know. What exactly is your relationship to that woman?
We're friends.
Good friends?
Yes.
How good do you live together?
Wait a minute. This isn't about...
Are you her little bed bug?
Okay, the fact that Barry refuses to answer that question under oath does lead me to believe that him banging that lady is officially canon, which... hot. After getting to the bottom of Barry's sex life, the lawyer then goes on to grill him on Bee Movie's own confusing science.
I've seen a bee documentary or two. Now, from what I understand, doesn't your queen give birth to all the bee children in the hives?
Yeah, but...
So those aren't even your real parents.
Oh, Barry.
Yes, they are.
Hold me back.
You're an illegitimate bee, aren't you, Benson?
He's denouncing bees.
All right, not sure what that has to do with the trial. No, not gonna lie, feels pretty racist. And Alan agrees. The lawyer's over-the-top line of questioning angers Alan so much that he loses control and attacks in a blind rage. And remember that Chekov stinger I showed you earlier? Well, this right here is the payoff. I spent the entire movie convinced that Barry was going to use his one sting defending the woman he loves, but instead, all we get is his nerdy friend losing control in a courtroom and jeopardizing the case. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I was also actively wondering all of the questions the lawyer asked there, but nothing he said really seemed that bad to me. Don't get me wrong, I get why Alan is angry, but it feels weird to me that he'd be so angry that he'd be willing to die in order to attack that dude, because lest you forget, They clearly establish that once a bee stings someone, they die.
Everybody knows you sting someone, you die.
But also Alan just doesn't die. So they get him on an IV drip of honey and replace his broken stinger with a prosthesis made from the kind of plastic sword they serve at a tiki restaurant, and he's just fine within a day. And like, I get it, it's a kid's movie, so it makes sense why you wouldn't kill off one of the main characters. But that said, if you're not gonna kill off one of your main characters, then don't fucking tell me you are gonna kill off one of your main characters. I'm sorry that was uncalled for. This movie just makes me mad. If I had one sting, I'd probably use it on B-movie. I don't care if it kills me. The next day, Barry doesn't show up to court, and the judge comes very close to throwing out the case.
I move for complete dismissal of this entire case.
Mr. Flamin, I'm afraid I'm going to have to consider Mr. Montgomery's motion.
But you can't. We have a terrific case.
Where's your proof? Where's the evidence? Show me the smoking gun!
Oh, right, I forgot. After Alan stings him in the butt, the John Goodman lawyer shows up to court in one of those bouncing baby chairs, and like, I'm not sure that I fully understand it, but I thought it was another example of an unironically great joke in this movie. I laughed very hard at that. But yeah, the lawyer is in his play chair hamming it up for the jury, but before the judge can call the trial, Barry dramatically bursts in with a new piece of evidence.
Hold it, Your Honor! You want a smoking gun? Here is your smoking gun!
What is that?
It's a bee smoker!
What, this? This harmless little contraption? This couldn't hurt a fly, let alone a bee.
I kind of get the sense that this moment was the entire reason for the trial plotline, because that whole smoking gun double entendre is the first time that there's ever been any organic feeling connection between the legal process and bumblebees. Still, even if it's solid wordplay, I don't know that it's great evidence. It seems very weird to me that everyone is so shocked by Barry's revelation, because like, they're in the middle of a trial about the legality of beekeeping. I feel like they should probably already know about those things. I don't know very much about beekeeping myself, but even I know that they use those little smokers. Honestly, besides the silly astronaut suits that they wear, I think that it might be the only thing that I know. The fact that they're on day 3 and the jury is like, gasp, I didn't know that they used those, is a sign to me that Barry is not doing a very good job at arguing his case. Also, I get that the smoker is pretty fucked up from the bee's perspective, but the jury is somewhat questionably comprised of nothing but humans, and from their perspective, it is not the most bombastic thing to happen in this courtroom. The trial literally opens with Barry revealing to the world that bees are capable of human speech, and I feel like that should have been a much bigger turning point in the case than it ended up being.
Sarah, it's an incredible scene here in downtown Manhattan, where all eyes and ears of the world are anxiously waiting, because for the first time in history, we're going to hear for ourselves if a honeybee can actually speak.
I'm kidding.
If I were Barry, I feel like my argument would probably begin and end with me being like, so, I'm a bee, and I'm evolved enough to argue in your legal system, so like, I don't know, maybe you should stop keeping others like me captive and forcing them to work against their will. Just a thought. I'd obviously make a terrible bee lawyer though, because Barry's plan works, and with momentum on his side, he goes on to make one last rousing speech in favor of his cause.
Members of the jury, look at what has happened to bees who have never been asked, smoking or none. Is this what nature intended for us? To be forcibly addicted to these smoke machines in man-made wooden slat work camps? Living out our lives as honey slaves to the white man?
Okay, I guess I wasn't overthinking it with my whole "the bees are slaves" reading of the film. I mean, I kind of wish that I was now, but I guess I wasn't. Still, regrettable or not, Barry's closing argument works because the judge rules that humans can no longer take bees' honey away from them. And as I'm sure that most of you have probably already guessed by now, this ruling leads to the apocalypse. I'm not joking. Having all the honey taken by humans returned to them means that the bees now have a massive surplus, and thus, they don't have to work anymore in order to produce it. Without any need to produce honey, the bees stop pollinating flowers, which leads to the collapse of the ecosystem and turns the world as we know it into an arid, hellish wasteland. And for whatever reason, this is where all three of the movie's plot lines start to converge. We return to the first storyline when Barry sees the state of the world and realizes the value of work.
What happened here?
That is not the half of it.
Oh no. Oh my. They're all wilting.
Doesn't look very good, does it?
No.
And whose fault do you think that is?
You know, I'm gonna guess bees.
Bees?
Specifically me. I guess I didn't think that bees not needing to make honey would affect all these other things.
Okay, not gonna lie, that seems a little bit harsh, Renee Zellweger. Like, yes, Barry is the one who started the court case that led to bees not having to work anymore, but just because they don't have to work, that doesn't mean that they can't. You'd think that once they saw the world start to crumble, bees would be like, I guess we gotta take one for the team on this one and get back in the field. And the fact that they don't leads me to believe that every last member of bee civilization has blood on their hands, not just Barry. Also, I get what they're going for here by trying to show how even seemingly small jobs can have a huge impact, but it's hard for me to watch this part of the movie and not feel just a little bit uncomfortable by it. Like, were I to follow my earlier reading to its natural conclusion based on this scene, it feels like the message here is that slavery isn't great, but without it we wouldn't have the world we know, which... Well, I guess the case could be made. I'm not really sure I'd want to make that the crux of my children's movie. And I'm not saying that B-movie is pro-slavery. I just don't really know how to end that sentence in a way that suggests anything to the contrary. Aside from wrapping up Barry's aversion to work in a weird little bow, this final section also sees the continuation of Barry and Renee Zellweger's romantic arc as the fallout from Barry's trial leaves her furious at her Apian concubine, although not, as you might have suspected, because he's indirectly responsible for the end of the world. Rather, her ire seems to be purely financial in nature, because she is a florist by profession, and the bees' refusal to pollinate flowers has forced her to close her shop. She tells Barry she's going to Pasadena, California to see the Rose Bowl because it's the last time she'll be able to because of the whole apocalypse thing that's happening in the background, and when Barry realizes that there will be a large quantity of flowers there, he gets the idea to pollinate them in an effort to right his wrong. And like again, I'm not an expert on botany or parades, but I'm pretty sure that the roses at the Rose Bowl have already been cut, so I don't think that pollinating them would really do anything. I'm pretty sure that this is the flower equivalent of trying to save someone's life by feeding their corpse. But whatever, this is their plan, and in this world it makes sense. So Barry and Renee Zellweger fly to Pasadena together, and then on the way there, the bees hijack a plane or something. I don't know, I'll be perfectly honest, I had completely tuned out by this point, but as best as I can tell, everything that happens between now and the end is just Barry fixing everything. His plan to pollinate the Rose Bowl works like gangbusters and the world is saved, but more importantly, Renee Zellweger is able to open her flower shop back up again. Now understanding the value of work, Barry opens up a law office for bugs in the back of the flower shop because he's a lawyer now apparently. But he's also a pollen jock now too. End of film. Looking at it purely as a piece of filmmaking, I would say that B-Movie is one of the worst goddamn things that I have ever seen, but That said, I'm kinda hesitant to call it bad. For whatever reason, I do very much get the sense that this weird, confusing mess is the exact movie that Jerry Seinfeld and the rest of the creators wanted to make. So, in that sense, I'm kind of inclined to call it a success. I will be blunt. Watching this movie with the goal of trying to understand it well enough to talk about it for this video was honestly one of the least fun experiences I've had since I started this channel. That said though, I think that if I had met B-Movie under different circumstances, my opinion on it would probably be very different. It is a very strange combination of truly baffling and genuinely funny, and I think that if instead of trying to make sense of it, you just kind of let it wash over you and do its thing, then it would honestly be a blast. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this movie. Like an upsetting amount of time. I have contorted my brain into knots trying to comprehend plot points and gotten physical headaches figuring out how to explain basic details in words. A large amount of my mental energy has been devoted almost exclusively to B-Movie for a very long time now, and that's frustrating because I still don't feel like I understand fundamental elements of what I just watched and why it exists. Like I said, I usually feel like I can at least comprehend what a movie is going for and why the people making it made the decisions that they made, but that is not the case with B-Movie, and after a certain point I kind of just wanted to get to the bottom of it. So I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I kept thinking about it, trying to make sense of how this bizarre piece of media came to be, and the best explanation for B-Movie that I was able to come up with was that nobody making it really thought about it as much as I did. I don't want to sit here and act like I have any great insight into how Jerry Seinfeld's mind works, but from what I've seen from him, he strikes me as the sort of person who simply does not give a fuck. From his comedy to his dating history, Seinfeld gives off the vibes of someone who does not put a lot of stock into what other people think about him. And while that's maybe not always the best trait to have, see his dating history, I do think it helps explain this movie. My best attempt for a grand unifying theory of B-Movie is that sometime in the early to mid 2000s, Jerry Seinfeld pitched this movie as a joke, and then Spielberg was like, alright, let's make it, and so Seinfeld was kind of just like, alright, I guess I'm making a movie about a talking bee. That sounds stupid. But he made the movie anyway because he thought it would be fun, and then he wrote a script doing his best to have fun with it. He didn't stress about how everything fits together, or small details, or literally anything. All he did was do his best to make himself laugh in the moment, and if anyone had a problem with that, then what the fuck did he care? He already had Seinfeld money. I think that if I were to bring up literally any one of my criticisms to Jerry Seinfeld, he'd probably look me right in the eye and say, really? Are you really gonna overanalyze a movie about a talking bee? My Seinfeld needs some work, but you get what I mean. And while this makes B-Movie a bit of a frustrating watch, in a weird way, it also makes it kind of inspirational. Well, to me it does anyway. Because I super don't function in the same way. As I've said many times over the course of this video, I think a lot. I truly cannot stress to you how much of my brain space went into the making of this thing. I overthought the plot, and then I overthought all the small details that made up the plot, and then I overthought how I was going to convey all those thoughts in words. And before that, I overthought whether or not I should even make this video at all. I overthought if it's okay that I'm breaking my own rules, and what might happen if I make something about a movie that lots of other people have already talked about. And it hasn't happened yet, but I promise you that once I release this thing, I'm gonna overthink it some more. I'm gonna overthink if I could have said the things I said more clearly, and overthink if people actually like it or if they're just saying they do, and overthink if I'm using the word overthink too much in this section of the video. And that's just the YouTube side of my life. That is not where my overthinking habit ends. I overthink relationships and the things I say and the choices I make, and just about every other aspect of my own existence. Before I do just about anything, I try my best to guess at where it will all lead, or what people might think about it, or what horrible fates might befall me because of it. And then a lot of the time, all the stress of that makes it so that I just don't do anything at all. And when I do manage to push through all the thoughts and do shit, I overthink some more. I think about if I could have done it better, or if the way I did it is being judged, or if maybe I just shouldn't have done it to begin with. And it's weird too, because I don't really know what I'm so afraid of. I mean, don't get me wrong, I spend a lot of time thinking about things to be afraid of, but at the end of the day, those are just thoughts. I truly don't know what would happen if I just let myself barrel through life without stressing over every step I take, because I've never actually let myself barrel through life without stressing over every step I take. And who knows, maybe every horrible thing I think might happen is true, but the more I think about it, the more I think that maybe my worst case scenario might honestly just be B-movie. This is, after all, a $150 million movie with a cast and crew of hundreds that played worldwide at thousands of theaters and has been seen by millions of people. In my wildest dreams, nothing I could ever do will ever be as consequential as B-movie. And for as depressing as it is to think about that, it's also kind of freeing because, B-movie's not that bad. I mean, don't get me wrong, were I in Jerry Seinfeld's position, I don't think that I'd ever actively try to make B-movie, but if this is really what it looks like to not give a fuck on such a giant scale, then I don't know why I'm spending all that effort stressing about things on the tiny little scale that I operate on. I mean, sure, it wasn't a hit. It sounds like it kind of just barely recouped its budget, and there's probably a reason that B-Movie 2 isn't a thing, but that said, it's not like DreamWorks went under because of it. It wasn't well received. It currently holds a 49% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I think that a lot of people were disappointed that this is what Seinfeld chose for his first big project since he ended his sitcom, but that said, it wasn't without its supporters, and it even managed to nab itself a Golden Globe nomination. And yes, its legacy is something of a joke. It's been mocked to death by the internet and ironically memed to within an inch of its life, but at least it's remembered. And honestly, I don't think that would have happened if B-Movie was made any different. If it cared about any of the criticisms I brought up and was made to be something a little bit more coherent and conventional, I think that today it would probably be thought of as that fine movie about a bumblebee that Jerry Seinfeld made for some reason. Instead, it's taken on a life of its own. It's become the subject of jokes and videos and all sorts of other stupid internet stuff, and in its own weird way, it actually has ended up bringing a lot of people a lot of joy, which is kind of the best outcome you can hope for with a movie. Which is not to say that if you don't give a fuck, everything will just magically work out for you all the time, but it might. And if you make yourself miserable overthinking every little thing, that's no guarantee that everything will go perfectly. I think that things are going to happen how they happen, and no matter how hard you try, you're never going to be able to truly predict what that is. So rather than thinking over every little thing, you might as well just do whatever feels right to you. So in the spirit of practicing what I preach, I'm going to go ahead and close things out here. And in true me fashion, I've thought a lot about how to end this video, and I feel like there's only one right way to do it. And I didn't think that I should because it's corny and obvious, and I've already used it before, and B-Movie had it first. But that said, it feels right, so here it goes. According to all known laws of aviation, there is no way a bee should be able to fly. Its wings are too small to get its fat little body off the ground. The bee, of course, flies anyway because bees don't care what humans think. But yeah, that's my video. Please like and subscribe and share and comment and follow me on things, I guess. Also, if you have some extra money lying around, please consider subscribing to my Patreon because, well, I just did my taxes and I would very much like to make more money this year than I did last year. Speaking of which, thank you again to Atlas VPN for sponsoring this episode. If you are in the market for a VPN, please use my link below. It will not only get you a good product, but it will also help out the channel, and so everyone's a winner. Also, I am still promoting my I Am Pro-Choice t-shirts because I make terrible life decisions, and people actually buy this more than most of my other merch. So, if you don't know what this means, you can still buy the t-shirt. It's a fun shirt. But yeah, that's my video. Bye. Hello, real fans who stay till the end. It's time for everyone's favorite part of my videos that I spend months writing. Willie says gibberish while patrons' names scroll up the screen, and then he also poses for a thumbnail photo. And so I've already kind of started the thumbnail for this one, and I have a specific picture, and it's Barry going like this. So I think it'd be fun if I kind of make like a, you got like a half smile, so it's like, I should get, okay, I'm grabbing my phone because this is where my phone is. And I'm going to find the actual picture. I'm going to Google Barry Benson arms crossed. Barry Benson arms crossed. And then I found it. So now I know the word. So he's crossing and he's kind of like, so he's going this way. So it's this, so he's doing it, so he'd be right here. So I want to be facing this way and looking over, and so like, it's not a very good angle for me. I should move my hat too. So hi, Barry. Two friends, me and Barry, posing with our arms crossed, la la la. So, I guess his head's kind of tilted, so like, I do not know what my smile looks like right now, but it can't be good, so. I'm not chatting as much in this one because it's hard to chat and smile at the same time. But hopefully you guys like long stretches of silence. I don't know why you guys like any part of these segments, so I feel like there's a chance that you do. But yeah, hopefully I got my shot in there. If not, nothing matters. We're all gonna die one day. So yeah, bye.